Always that feeling of being watched. It was close to 2 in the morning when I heard it, a soft scratch on the wall behind the headboard. At first I ignored it. It could be a mouse. But then the sound intensified, turning into a long, methodical scratch. My breathing became erratic. Something was inside the wall. I stood away from the headboard. The scratch stopped. For an instant the silence was absolute, and then, with a dry bang, a piece of the wall cracked. A pair of red eyes stared at me from the darkness. I ran downstairs, my feet hitting the rotten planks. The front door came down my weight, and I threw myself outside, the night air burning my lungs behind me. Something roared from inside the house, something not human. I rushed towards the road, not daring to look back. Then I saw the lights of a car. A police patrol stopped in front of me. The officer came out immediately, with one hand on his pistol. "He's fine, sir." I turned towards the house, but the Migan farm was no longer there. There was only an empty lot covered with tall grass. The officer insisted on taking me to the station. There informed me that there was no farm in that area for over 40 years. I never took that shortcut again because some roads lead to places that should never be found. The Latico key felt strangely heavy on my palma as I stopped at the foot of the narrow staircase. My uncle's last words echoed in my mind. "Whatever you do, don't open the red door." But curiosity is a powerful force, and as I climbed the creaky wooden steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to discover a family secret that would change my life forever. My name is Jay. I'm a 25-year-old freelance writer, and I recently inherited the old house. Edgar had always been fascinated by him, attracted by his mysterious aura and the fantastic stories he told. But in his later years he became a recluse. He refused visitors and communicated only through cryptic letters. The house was a veritable treasure trove of rarities, shelves full of dusty tomes on dark subjects, display cases with artifacts from all over the world, and strange machines whose purpose he could not even. But what intrigued me most was the attic. Throughout my childhood, that place was strictly forbidden. Every time I asked about it, my uncle dodged the conversation with an enigmatic smile. Now, as the sole heir to his legacy, I finally had a chance to find out what was there. The key fit into the lock with a satisfying snap, and the door opened with a groan of protest. The attic was more small than I had imagined, lit only by a circular window in the ceiling. Dust hung in the air, dancing in the dim light. There were trunks, old furniture, and piles of yellowed papers scattered everywhere. But what caught my attention the most was the door, a red door on the back wall. The color was vibrant, almost too intense for the gloom of the attic. My heart pounding, as that was the door that my uncle warned me not to open. Common sense told me that I should move away, that I should respect his last wish, but the writer in me, the part that craved mysteries and hidden stories, pushed me to go on. I reached out and touched the doorknob. It was icy. A shiver ran down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, but with a deep breath I turned the handle and I pushed the door open. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe a secret room full of forbidden books, a hidden treasure. What I found defied all logic. Beyond the red door there was no room, but a vortex of colors and lights in constant motion, pulsing and turning inside that impossible whirlwind. Floating, a book looked like an antique, bound in dark leather with strange symbols engraved on its cover. Without thinking, I stretched out my hand, and I picked it up. The moment my fingers touched the surface of the book, the vortex collapsed with a thunderous roar. I found myself back in the attic, the red door slamming behind me with such force that the whole house seemed to press the book to my chest, my mind spinning with questions. What it was that I had just seen? What had this book? Why my Uncle Edgar had it. I went downstairs and made my way to his study, sat down at his old wooden desk and examined the book more closely. The leather was warm to the touch, almost as if it had a life of its own. The symbols on the cover seemed to move when I didn't look at them directly. I swallowed hard and with a deep breath opened it. The pages were filled with dense writing in a language I didn't recognize. There were diagrams, illustrations of creatures that couldn't exist, beings with too many eyes, too many arms, anatomies that defied the laws of nature. Suddenly a loose leaf fell from the book. It was a letter. The calligraphy was unmistakable, that of my Uncle Edgar. "My dear Jay, if you're reading this, it means that I've departed from this world and that you've ignored my warning about the red door. I don't blame you. Curiosity is part of it. Our nature has been our greatest strength and our greatest curse. The book you now hold is called the Umbra Codex. It has been in our family for generations, passing only to those with the gift of understanding its secrets. It is a window to worlds, beyond ours, a map of hidden realities, a record of beings and powers that humanity should not know, but it is also dangerous. The knowledge it contains has a price the more you read it. The thinner it will become, the barrier between your world and others. You will see things that no one else can see, and they will see you. I spent my life studying the Codex, marveling with its revelations, but it also brought terrors that haunted me until my last breath. Now I leave you this burden, not out of cruelty, but because I believe you have the strength to endure it. Be careful, Jay. The path you have chosen will not be easy, but know that I am proud of you with all my love, Uncle Edgar. I sat on the letter, trembling in my hands. Part of me wanted to close the book, seal it away, and pretend that I had never found it, but another part, the same one that led me to open the door, read. First of all, I was excited. This was more than a simple inheritance. It was an invitation to the unknown. For the next few weeks I spent immersed myself in the study of the Umbra Codex. I lost track of time. I barely slept. I barely ate. Little by little I began to decipher its language, to understand its diagrams, and just as my uncle noticed, things began to change. At first they were subtle shadows that seemed to move when I did not look, at whispers in the dark corners of the house, but the more I learned, the more tangible the impossible became. I began to seeing creatures reflected in mirrors, strange landscapes in my dreams. Sometimes I woke up with sand on my bed, or with the scent of flowers that did not exist on earth. Then on the night of the full moon, exactly a month after opening the red door, I understood everything. I had been reading a particularly complex passage from the Codex. I unconsciously began to murmur the words aloud. The air in the room became the shadows crawled along the walls, forming a dark whirlwind, and out of nowhere something emerged. A being with impossible limbs and an incandescent eye in the center of his face, watching me, waiting. The threshold was open, and now I had to decide whether to cross it or seal it forever. The frantic barking woke me up suddenly, my heart hammering in my chest. As I sat up in bed, Molly, the docile golden retriever of the Johnsons, sounded like I was trying to wake up the dead. Extensions, chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just the typical fuss of a dog asking to go out into the garden. Something was wrong. I'm Alex, a 22-year-old college student, and had been taking care of the Johnsons' house for a week while they were on vacation in the Caribbean. It was a simple job to water the plants, pick up the mail, and keep Molly company. The spacious suburban house, it was a welcome change after my tiny dorm room in college, and up until that moment everything had been peace and quiet until tonight. My phone screen flashed 2:37 to Molly. Each bark was still barking, more desperate than the last. I got up and opened the door to the guest room. Molly called softly, "What's up, girl?" The bark stopped immediately. A low, menacing growl replaced it with the direction of the sound. It came from the kitchen near the back door. Every instinct inside me told me to go back into the room, lock the door, and call the but what if Molly was in danger, or worse, and if there was really anyone inside the house. I took the heaviest object I found, a glass vase from the hallway table, and went downstairs with cautious steps, each creak of the wood beneath my feet sounding too loud in the tense stillness of the house. As I reached the kitchen, a moonbeam illuminated the room across from the window. Molly stood by the back door, completely stiff, her fur bristling and her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "Molly," you murmured. Eyes followed the direction of her gaze, and then I saw him, a shadow darker than darkness itself, moving behind Molly. He was humanoid, but incorrect, tall, too thin. His proportions were subtly wrong, disturbingly unnatural. I opened my mouth to scream, but no one came out. The shadow raised a hand, a grotesquely long-fingered hand, and directed it toward the handle of the back door. It was then that Molly exploded in barking. Breaking the trance I was entrapped, ran to the light switch and pulled it with all my might. The sudden glare blinded me. For a second, when my eyes got used to it, the shadow had disappeared. The door was closed as it had been. Molly was still grunting, but now her gaze was swinging between me and the window. I tried to convince myself that it had been an illusion, a trick of light and lack of sleep, but Mole knew the truth for the rest of my stay. She refused to go near the back door. At night she slept glued to me, her ears alert to every sound, and sometimes at night. In the depths of the morning he woke up with his low and menacing growl, his eyes riveted on some dark corner of the room. When the Johnsons returned, I told them nothing how to explain something that I did not understand. I politely rejected their offer to take care of the house again on future occasions. But before I left I took one last look upstairs, and there in the window of the Johnsons' room I saw something for just a second. A tall, thin figure watching me step on the accelerator. I didn't slow down until the street was far behind me. Months have passed since that night, but the feeling of being watched hasn't disappeared. Sometimes in the gloom of my room I hear a slight scratch on the door, and when I muster up the courage to look through the peephole, I don't see anything. Just too dense a darkness, too motionless, too alive. The rusty gate creaked in protest as I pushed it, the sound echoing ominously through the abandoned enos of Ravenswood Asylum, moonlight filtering through the gnarled branches of unkempt trees, casting twisted shadows that seemed to move in the corner of my eye, swallowing hard, trying to hold back the chill that ran down my spine. It was just a summer job. I reminded myself of 3 months as a security guard in an old and empty building. How bad could it be? My name is Mike. I'm 20 years old and I'm a college student. I desperately needed money for the next semester's tuition, and when I saw the ad to be a night watchman in Ravenswood, I didn't hesitate. Yes, the place had a creepy reputation, full of rumors of abused patients, cruel doctors, and unsolved disappearances, but I didn't believe in ghosts besides. The ground was incredibly good, too good. The security company gave me clear instructions. Make rounds every hour, check for intruders or vandalism, and most importantly, don't enter the main building. According to them, the building was in ruins and dangerous, but as I shone my flashlight on the facade that first night, I had the feeling that the warning had nothing to do with the structure. The first 3 nights were quiet. Too quiet. There were no noises of nocturnal animals or insects buzzing, nor the typical creak of an old building settling at its base. Only silence until the 4th night. It was about 2:30 in the morning when I heard the sound. A soft song, almost like a murmur floating in the stagnant air. I stopped in secco, trying to locate the source. The sound came from inside the forbidden building. My first reaction was to my surprise. One of the boards that sealed the entrance was loose, swaying slightly in the breeze. I didn't remember it being like this before. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing in the darkness. The singing stopped. For an instant the silence returned, and then a whisper so low that I barely caught it. "Come inside. We've been waiting for you." The fear slipped through my veins like ice. Every cell in my body screamed at me to turn around and run away, but something pushed me to keep going. With one last breath I snuck through the hole and I entered Ravenswood. The interior was a world alien to the outside. The corridors were covered in dust and moo, with wallpaper peeling off in strips and furniture rotten by the humidity. There were still rusty stretchers, empty wheelchairs, and medicine bottles strewn on the floor. But the worst thing was the smell, a mixture of dampness, confinement, and something else somewhat rotten. "There's someone here?" I asked, my voice. Just a whisper. No answer. Just the echo of my own voice and the sound of footsteps upstairs. My flashlight flickered. "You murmur," but a shiver ran down my spine. For the brief second I was there, I asked, my voice. Barely a whisper. No answer. Only the echo of my own voice and the sound of footsteps upstairs. My flashlight flickered. "You murmur," but a shiver ran down my spine. For the brief second I was there, I was in the middle of the night. It was all dark. I had seen something. A figure standing at the end of the hallway. Tall, too thin, faceless. I didn't stay to find out more. I ran for the exit, my breath turning into muffled gasps. But when I got to the door it was closed. The board loose was no longer loose. It was completely nailed, as if it had never been moved. My flashlight flickered again, and when it came back on, the walls were covered with hands, dozens of footprints stamped into the plaster, as if dozens of people had tried to scratch their way out. A childish giggle echoed in the hallway behind me. "You shouldn't be here," whispered a voice. I turned slowly, and there she was, a little girl of about 8 years old in a white nightgown covered in dirt. Her head was tilted, a smile that didn't quite fit her expression. "Go before let them see you," he said in a sing-song voice. Who I tried to ask. The answer came before I could finish the question. An inhuman roar from the top of the stairs. A silhouette dropped to the ground. It was tall, hunched over, with limbs too long and fingers ending in claws. I had no face, just grayish skin and tents on an impossible skull. My legs reacted before my brain ran. I ran with everything I had, desperately searching for a way out. The walls seemed to twist around me. The corridors lengthened, as if the building itself was changing to trap me inside. The murmurs intensified into screams. A voice louder than the others resounded in my mind. "Stay." A flash of light cut me off. Suddenly, the noise disappeared, flickered, and I found myself standing outside the asylum. The sun was already rising, but the marks on my arms and legs were there, scratches, bruises, proof that it hadn't been a dream. I quit that same day, but even now, months later, Ravenswood hasn't let me go at all. Some nights just before I go to sleep, I hear the whispers. Sometimes I wake up with the feeling that there's someone else in my room. And once, only once, I caught a reflection in the mirror, a face, or rather, the absence of one, the key to the lattice, weighed strangely on my palma as I stood at the foot of the narrow staircase. My uncle's last words still echoed in my mind. No matter what, don't open the red door. But curiosity is a powerful force, and as I climbed the creaking steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to discover a family secret that would change my life forever. The attic was smaller than I imagined, lit only by the dim light that came in through a small, circular window. Dust hung in the air, and a rancid smell of old paper and rotten wood permeated the atmosphere. My eyes wandered around the room, past old trunks, furniture covered with sheets and stacks of yellowed books, but my attention was immediately fixed on it. The room, standing like an ominous shadow among the forgotten objects, was dark wood, with a deep crimson hue, almost bright in the dim light. It had no lock, no knob. I was just there, waiting. A shiver ran down my spine. My uncle's words echoed in my head. No matter what, don't open the red door. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding hard in my chest. I raised my hand, and I ran my fingers over the surface of the wood. It was cold more than it should be, and then it happened. The door vibrated as if something behind it had felt my touch. I jerked back my breathing, speeding up all in my body, screaming at me to get out of there. But then I heard the voice, Jay. It was a sweet, tempting whisper, my name pronounced with an impossible softness. I swallowed my throat dry. "Uncle Edgar," I asked in a low voice, although I knew he was dead. There was no response, just a slight but insistent dull thud from the other side of the door. Something was there, waiting. I held my breath as the red spot on the wood seemed to beat as if it had a pulse of its own. An irrational thought crossed my mind, and if you are not closed, and if I can open it. My fingers moved before I could stop them by pressing against the surface. A creak, a whisper, and then the door opened by itself. An abyss of darkness stretched out before me. There was no floor, there were no walls, only an unfathomable, deep, infinite void. The air inside was moving as if something huge was breathing in the blackness. I took a step back, but something grabbed my arm, bony hands, cold as ice. I turned my head sharply and found myself face to face with him. Uncle Edgar, or what was left of him. His skin was pale and withered, with deep cracks as if it were broken porcelain. His eyes, sunken and dark ones, shone with an unnatural glow. His mouth opened in a smile too wide. "I knew you would come, Jay." His voice was the same as always, but at the same time it wasn't. I tried to let go, but his grip was like steel. "Listen carefully." His eyes still shone. "But if you cross this door there will be no turning back." The pressure of his hand intensified. "Let me go," I whispered, feeling the abyss behind me, and then, with impossible force, he pushed me towards the door. The world exploded in a swirl of shadows and wind, and I fell, for what seemed like an eternity. The air was cold and dense, as if descending through an unfathomable void. There was no light or sound, just the feeling of falling into an infinite space, just when I thought I would never hit bottom. The opened in a gust of icy wind and land on the ground, trying to catch my breath. The ground beneath me was smooth and cold as polished stone. I sat up, slowly flickering in the gloom, and then I saw it. The hallway stretched in both directions, with black stone walls covered with inscriptions that seemed to move if I looked at them too long. The light came from floating torches that burned with a bluish flame and, flickering, the air smelled something old, like old books and moisture trapped for centuries. I got up with difficulty, my mind still trying to process what had happened. Where the hell I am in the hallway. There was no sign of Uncle Edgar or the door I had fallen through. I tried to breathe calmly, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I had to keep going. I started walking, with each step echoing in the stone under my feet. The corridor seemed endless, but after a while I saw something ahead. A figure was on its back, dressed in long and dark. I stopped in dry hello. My voice sounded muffled in the immensity of the corridor. The figure did not move. I hesitated for a moment, and then I advanced cautiously. When I was close enough, I felt a chill run over my coat. Long, the hunched posture was Uncle Edgar. "Uncle," I whispered slowly, very slowly. He turned his head towards me, but his face was not my uncle's. His skin was stretched and withered with deep, dark cracks. His eyes were empty and infinite black wells. And when he opened his mouth to speak, I escaped. My instinct screamed at me to run, and so I ran, without looking back, feeling the weight of his gaze piercing my back. The corridors twisted and changed to me. Around the symbols on the walls throbbed with a sickly light. The shadows seemed to move when I wasn't looking straight, and then, as I turned a corner, I saw the door. It was another red door, but this one was open without thinking. I ran to it and darted across the threshold. A burst of light blinded me. The world spun and dissolved into a whirlwind of images and shadows, and then, without warning, I was back in the middle of the door. The attic, I fell to the wooden floor, panting. The air was heavy with dust. The circular window let in a faint ray of light. The red door was there, but now it was closed. I crawled backwards, away from it as if it were a sleeping animal that I didn't want to wake up. My skin was cold, sticky with sweat. I sat on the floor breathing heavily, trying to understand what the hell had happened. No, I knew how long I was there staring at the door, not daring to move, but then I noticed a detail that made my blood run cold. The door now I had a knob, and even worse, from the other side someone was turning it. I fell into darkness for what felt like an eternity. The air around me was thick and icy, and the feeling of infinite emptiness enveloped me. I couldn't scream. I couldn't breathe alone. I could fall suddenly without warning. Hit something solid. The impact took my breath away. I gasped for the air itself. I breathed into it. I looked around and saw that I was in what seemed to be an endless corridor of black stone. The walls were covered with strange symbols engraved in a calligraphy that I did not recognize, but that somehow felt familiar. I tried to convince myself that it was a dream. But it was not. I could feeling the cold in my bones, the roughness of the stone under my fingers. This was real, and it wasn't just a murmur, reverberating through the corridor, low, constant, coming from everywhere and from none at once. I stood up with difficulty, my heart beating wildly. A movement to my left made me turn sharply. Something slipped through the shadows. I didn't walk, not crawling, but sliding with a fluidity that made me feel nauseating. I didn't get to see its full form, only fragments of a silhouette too tall, too thin. The whisper grew in intensity. It wasn't just any murmur, it was my name, Jay. My muscles tensed. I had to move. I had to get out of there. I chose a random path and ran. The corridors were labyrinthine, all the same, with the same unnatural glow in the torches, and the whisper followed me louder. Closer. I turned a corner and stopped in dry. In front of me there was a door, but not just any door was the same. The red door. My mind twisted with the impossibility of that. How could it be here? The wood had the same texture, the same deep red color, as if it were beating with a life of its own, and the worst thing was opening very slowly. 1 centimeter, another, and then I saw it, something on the other side, something waiting for me. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. Eyes peeked through the gap, infinite blackness, with an inner glow like embers in a bottomless cavern. And then a hand emerged, long, bony. It wasn't human. It was like that of a corpse that had been forgotten for centuries in the darkness. The hand reached out to me, the fingers moving as if they were calling me, and then the voice spoke. It wasn't a whisper this time, it was thundering. It rumbled in the halls, in my bones, in my very soul. It's time for you to claim your inheritance. An icy wind hit my face, pushing me towards the open door. I couldn't resist, I couldn't fight. The darkness was devouring, and then, just as I was about to be sucked into that threshold, a firm hand grabbed my arm. I turned sharply. It was my Uncle Edgar, but not as I had seen him, not before, with broken skin and sunken eyes. This time it looked like I remembered it from my childhood. Not yet, Jay. Her voice was loud. Clara still didn't push me back. Door slammed shut, and then I woke up. I was on the attic floor, panting, drenched in sweat. The red door was still there, but this time it was closed with an iron chain. I got up, trembling. My Uncle Edgar no longer it was, but on the ground, right in front of the door, there was an old yellow envelope with my name handwritten. I picked it up with fingers, trembling, and opened it. Inside there was a letter with just one sentence. When the time comes you'll know what to do. From that day on, I never touched the red door again, but I know that one day it will open again, and when it does, I'll have to choose. The first time I saw the child in the mirror, I thought I was losing my sanity. I found behind my reflection, pale and solemn, with eyes full of plea. I blinked and disappeared, but that was just the beginning of a nightmare that would consume my life and defy everything I thought I knew about reality. My name is Emily, and until months ago I was an ordinary woman, 28 years old. I had a stable job as a graphic designer, a cozy apartment in the city, and a cat called Whiskers. More attitude than fur. Everything changed the day I bought that antique mirror at a flea market. It was a beautiful piece, an ornate golden frame, tarnished by time, with the glass somewhat fogged up but still functional. The old woman who sold it to me practically pushed it into my hands. Her eyes clouded with intensity while telling me that it was destined for me. I must have suspected it then, but it was too enchanted by the vintage aesthetic of the mirror to listen my instinct the first week after hanging it in my room. Everything it was normal until that night when I saw the boy. At first I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light. Maybe my imagination was playing tricks on me after working late on a project, but deep down I knew it was something else. The boy appeared again a few nights later. This time I saw him longer. He was a boy of about 10 years old, with dark, tousled hair and eyes that looked too old for his age. He never spoke. He just looked at me with that pleading expression that made my chest hurt. I started to avoid the mirror. I covered it with a sheet when he slept, but it didn't matter. I started to see him in the reflections, away from the windows on my computer screen, in the puddles of water on the street after the rain. Always watching me, always in silence. My work began to suffer. I couldn't concentrate. I jumped at every shadow, at every unexpected reflection. My friends noticed the change in me, the deep dark circles under my eyes, the constant nervousness, the way I avoided mirrors. They suggested I go to a doctor. Who maybe I was stressed. How could I to explain to them that I was being stalked by a ghost child? Everything came to a head a month after buying the mirror. That night I woke up with the feeling that someone was watching me, and there he was, not in the mirror, not in a reflection, standing at the foot of my bed. This time it was real. I sat up suddenly with my heart hammering in my chest. "Who are you?" I asked in a trembling voice. "What do you want?" The kid, he opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Then he urgently pointed to the mirror, then pointed at me. "I don't understand," I whispered. "What am I supposed to do?" He pointed to the mirror again, and then gestured as if he was stepping forward. I got out of bed, feeling the air in the room get colder with every step I took. The mirror was still covered by the sheet, but even before from touching it I knew something was wrong. With a lump in my throat I slowly lifted the cloth. My reflection didn't imitate me. I wasn't smiling, and I wasn't smiling. That wasn't my reflection. Before I could react, some hands emerged from the mirror and grabbed me with inhuman force. I screamed, struggling against the impossible grip. I felt a tug on my body as if I were being dragged towards the glass. Reality itself splitting into fragments of light and shadow. I fell, and when I opened my eyes I was on the cold floor of a room that looked like a twisted version of my own. The colors were dull. Everything was inverted, as if I was seeing the world through a reflection, and there, standing above me with a triumphant smile, was my reflection, or whatever it was that had been pretending to be me. "At last," he said with a voice that was mine, but distorted, hollow. "You have any idea how long I've waited for someone to fall into the trap? This place has been so boring." I sat up, suddenly backing up. "What are you? Where am my reflection? The thing that pretended to be me?" Laughed. "Oh, sweet human, this is the world behind the mirrors. This is where all forgotten reflections and discarded dreams end." And I leaned into me with a wicked smile. "I am you, or at least the version of you that could have been." I felt panic creep over me. "But the child, who is he?" The creature's smile twisted. "A hindrance, a remnant of the last soul trapped here. He's been trying to warn others for years, but it doesn't matter. It'll disappear soon now that I'm free." Reality hit me like a fist. I was trapped in this world of reflections and shadows, and that thing was out living my life. "You can't do this," I whispered. "I don't belong here." "But you belong," mocked my double. "Everyone ends up here sooner or later. The world of mirrors always claims what belongs to it." Turned and crossed a shiny threshold, leaving my reflection trapped in this distorted place. I just sat there trying to take it in. How I could get out of here? How could I? Time passed strangely in this world. I didn't know if it had been hours or days, when Tommy, the child, appeared again, looked at me sadly, and came closer. "There's a way out," whispered. My heart raced. How he doubted. "It's dangerous, and even if it works, nothing will be the same. Tell me," I begged. "Tommy told me about an ancient mirror hidden in the depths of this realm. According to if a person found this mirror and pronounced their true name, not only their birth name, but the one that defined their essence, they could break the barrier between the worlds. It was a long way, but it was the only chance I had with Tommy as a guide. We set out on the search. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, my imagination playing tricks on me after I had stayed up late working on a project, but deep down I knew it was something else. The boy appeared again a few nights later, this time for longer. I could make out more details. He seemed to be about 10 years old, with dark and tousled hair and eyes that seemed too old for his childish face. He didn't speak, he just looked at me with that expression of plea that made a knot in my stomach. I began to avoid the mirror, covering it with a sheet at night, but it didn't matter. I began to see the child in other reflections, on the windows, on my computer screen, always watching me in silence. My work began to suffer. I couldn't concentrate. I jumped at any shadow or reflection. My friends noticed the change in me. The deep dark circles, the constant startles suggested that I visit a doctor. How could I explain to them that I was being stalked by a child in the mirror? Things got out of control. A month after I bought the mirror, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw it, not in the mirror, not in a reflection. It was at the foot of my bed. This time it was solid. Real, or at least as real as a ghost can be. I pushed myself against the headboard, my heart beating with a painful force. "What do you want?" I managed to ask with a broken voice. The boy didn't answer. Alone, he looked at me in despair and then pointed to the mirror. Turned my head slowly towards him. Something was wrong. My reflection wasn't mine. It was moving a second after me, and then he smiled. I wasn't smiling. A chill ran through my body. "I don't understand," I murmured, looking at the child again. He pointed to the mirror again, and then he gestured as if he were taking a step forward. I looked at my reflection of again. I was still smiling. Then suddenly some hands came out of the mirror, grabbed my wrists, and pulled me with impossible force. I screamed, struggling to free myself, but the pressure was unbearable. I felt my body being dragged towards the glass, as if I were being absorbed. The world exploded in flashes of light and shadow. When I regained consciousness, I was on the cold floor of a room that looked like mine, but I didn't. It was all upside down. The colors were strange, dull, and distorted. The room was reflected like a mirror, but something else was wrong. Then I saw it. My reflection was there, but it wasn't me. I was looking at myself from the other side of the mirror. With a smile of triumph, finally said his voice, a distorted replica of mine, "You know how long I've waited for someone to fall into the trap." My throat dried up. "Who are you? What is this place?" My reflection. I laugh with cruel amusement. "Oh dear, I am you. Or rather the version of you that could have been. And this is the world behind the mirrors, where the shadows of what was and what could have been end up forgotten." My mind struggled to comprehend it. But the child, for the first time, the smile of my reflection vanished. A hindrance, spat disdainfully. "The last poor soul trapped here has tried to warn others, but they never listen to it until it's too late." Horror got over me. Then I'm stuck here. My reflection gave me a mocking look. "Sure, yes. But don't worry, you'll get used to it, and who knows, maybe in a few decades you'll be the one to trick someone into taking your place." Turned around and walked through what looked like a door made of liquid light, leaving me alone in the grotesque, inverted version of my home. I don't know how long I was there. Time didn't seem to work the same way in this place. Eventually I found other souls trapped. Some had been there so long that they had forgotten the real world. Others were still desperately looking for a way out. It was Tommy, the boy in the mirror, who gave me hope. "There's a way," he whispered one night when he found me sitting in front of a distorted, mirrored version of my apartment. "But it's dangerous," as I asked in desperation. Tommy told me about an ancient mirror hidden in the depths of this realm. It was said that if someone found this mirror and said its true name, the name of its essence, it could break the barrier between the worlds. It was a risk, but it was my only option. With Tommy as my guide, I began the search. We faced landscapes, impossible creatures that lurked in the darkness, and worst of all, hopelessness, but we kept going until after what seemed like centuries we found the mirror. Its surface didn't reflect anything. It was a whirlwind of light and shadows vibrating with an indescribable energy. "Remember," Tommy said, holding my hand, "it's not the name they gave you. It's who you really are." I closed my eyes. I immersed myself inside, looking for beyond despair, and then I knew. I opened my eyes, looked at the mirror, and spoke a name I'd never heard before but recognized as mine. The world exploded in a whirlwind of light. When I woke up, I was on the floor of my room. The mirror was shattered. I'd come back, but something had changed. My hair had turned completely white. Then I found out that 3 months had passed. My friends and family members were shocked by my disappearance. The creature that took my place had wreaked havoc on my life, but now it had disappeared without a trace. It's been a year since I escaped the Mirror Kingdom. I try to move on, convince myself that it was all a nightmare, but I know the truth, and sometimes in the reflections I see a flash of movement. Sometimes I think I see Tommy still trying to warn others, and sometimes I feel something else, something dark, waiting, because now I know that what we see in the mirror isn't always just a reflection. Sometimes it's something you want to The moment I heard the first scream, I knew this wouldn't be a normal on-call night. Working as a security guard on the night shift at Oakwood Hospital, it was usually boring. But that night something in the air made me shudder, and I had no idea I was about to face a horror that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The scream echoed through the empty hospital hallways, bouncing off the walls in a way that made it impossible to determine where it was coming from. I jumped out of my chair with my heart beating in my throat. This wasn't the kind of sound I used to hear on my night shift. It wasn't a scream of pain or anguish common in a hospital, it was a scream of pure terror. Immediately I grabbed my radio and called the nurses' station. Someone else heard that where it came from. A few seconds of static were followed by the confused voice of one of the nurses. Hear that everything here is calm. I frowned. My teacher. There was a loud scream. Don't tell me you didn't hear it, David. We haven't heard anything. His tone with a mixture of impatience and worry. You're sure it was real? Before I could answer, the scream sounded lower again. This time as if it came from somewhere farther away, and this time I felt it. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just a sound. It was something vibrating in the air, as if the entire hospital was containing them within its walls. I'm going to investigate, I said over the radio, and walked in the direction of the sound. My footsteps led me to the old wing of the hospital. This part of the building had been closed for renovations for months. No one had any reason to be there. However, the doors to the hallway were wide open. I stopped at the entrance. The air was colder here. My breath came out in a little white cloud. This was not normal. I took out my flashlight and turned it on. Hello, I called with my voice echoing in the empty hallway. Nothing went into me. Slowly, the wing was in complete abandonment. Old walls, stretchers covered with dusty sheets, the floor covered with a thin veil of dirt. Then I saw her at the end of the hallway, a woman with her back to me, dressed in a threadbare and dirty hospital gown. Her dark hair was matted down her back. Ma'am, I said cautiously, she can't be here. She needs help. The woman didn't move. The air became denser. I took one step more. Lady, slowly, very slowly. The woman turned her head towards me, and I felt the blood freeze. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. But the worst thing was her eyes. There were no pupils, there was no iris, only a black void like two bottomless wells. I took a step back, panic rising up my throat. Then with an unnatural crunch, the woman turned completely towards. Help me, he whispered. His voice didn't come out of his mouth, but from everywhere, a sound that filled the air, that resounded in my bones. I let go, taking a step back. But before I could run, he disappeared. He didn't walk, he didn't hide, he just vanished. I froze, the flashlight trembling in my hand. This couldn't be happening. David, where are you? The nurse's voice on the radio made me jump. I put it in my mouth with shaking hands. I'm in the old man. There's something here. I just saw someone. I swallowed hard. There was a silence. Then the answer, David, you have to get out of there. Something is happening. The patients, everyone is seeing things, shadows, voices. There is a total panic in the hospital. My skin stood on end. At that moment the lights in the corridor began to flicker, and out of nowhere a raspy laugh. It seeped into the air. There was no one there, but something was with me. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was back in the main section of the hospital. But even then I knew I wasn't safe. Panic had taken over the whole place. Screaming patients, nurses running back and forth, whispers coming from empty rooms, and worst of all, every time I looked at a window, one reflective surface, a monitor turned off, I saw those black eyes watching me. The night became hell. But when dawn came, everything ended. The screams went out, the whispers disappeared, the visions disappeared, the official explanation ceased. It was collective hysteria. They said that maybe there was a gas leak, a slight intoxication, something that made us imagine what we saw. But I know the truth. I saw it, I felt it, and although I gave up my soon after, I still feel him, some nights awake from a start, convinced that someone is watching me from the darkness of my room. And sometimes, I just sometimes hear his voice. Help me. The scream echoed through the empty corridors of the hospital, bouncing off the walls in a way that made it difficult to identify its origin. I stood up immediately, adrenaline shooting in my veins. That wasn't a cry of pain, normal, nor of anguish. It was pure absolute terror. I reached for my radio as I made my way quickly down the hallway. Someone else heard that where it came from. There was a moment of static before the nurse on duty answered her confused voice. Hearing that here everything is quiet, I stopped in my tracks. How was it possible? Before I could process it, the scream repeated itself more quietly, this time as if I was being drowned by something. The skin on my arms stood on end. This time I came from the old wing of the hospital. That area had been closed for months due to renovations, and there was no one there. I gritted my teeth all my life. I had been skeptical of ghost stories. I preferred to focus on the real, on tangible threats. But at that moment, with the echo of that scream still vibrating in my ears, something inside me told me that I wasn't supposed to go, but I did. I turned on my flashlight and pushed the door on the old wing open, which opened with a chilling creak. The air inside was frozen, much colder than it should be in a heated hospital. The hallway was plunged into shadows, with only a few flickering lights projecting eerie flashes on the chipped walls. I stepped forward, and the door closed behind me with a sharp blow. I turned immediately and tried the locked handle. I swallowed great murmur, forcing me to keep moving forward. As I walked down the hallway, the sound of my own breathing seemed amplified in the oppressive stillness of the place. Then I saw her. A figure with her back to the end of the hallway. It was a woman in a tattered hospital gown and long dark hair falling matted down her back. She staggered slightly, as if she didn't could stand well on her feet. "Ma'am," I said, moving cautiously along. "She shouldn't be here. She's fine." There was no response. She stood motionless, and then, with a naturally slow Anton movement, she turned towards me. I froze. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with black veins snaking beneath the surface. But the worst thing was her completely black, empty eyes. The woman raised a trembling hand and muttered in a harsh voice, "Help me," and then disappeared. Didn't walk, it didn't run. It just vanished into thin air. I instinctively backed away, the icy sweat sticking to my back. That wasn't possible. It couldn't have disappeared. Like that, a crackling sound broke the silence. My radio, I took it with trembling hands. "David." The nurse's voice sounded distorted, full of interference. "Salt, from there, I got a knot in my stomach. What's going on?" "Patients." The static intensified. "They're seeing things, shadows, voices in empty rooms. Something's wrong." And then all the lights in the hallway flicker violently before going out completely. An icy whisper filled the air. I wasn't alone. The hallway was plunged into absolute darkness. The air became dense, as if something invisible was pressing my flashlight to my chest once, and then it went out. An unnatural cold ran through my body, and then I heard it whisper. Not a single one voice, but dozens, maybe hundreds, muttering in a low, unintelligible tone, came from everywhere, from the empty rooms of the ceiling, from within the walls. My instinct screamed for me to run, to get out of there immediately, but my legs weren't moving. It was then, when I noticed the figure was right in front of me, less than a meter away. I hadn't heard her approaching. It was the same woman I'd seen before, but now, his face was distorted into a grimace of suffering. His lips moved into soundless words, and then in a jerky motion he lifted his head and looked me straight in the eyes. My lungs ran out of air. His mouth slowly opened, and he let out a heart-rending scream that came not from his throat, but from everywhere. The doors along the hallway began to bang violently, as if something inside each room was desperate to get out, and at that moment my body reacted. I finally turned around and ran like never before in my life, not caring about where I was going, only with the visceral need to escape from that thing. The shadows on the walls twisted and spread as if trying to catch me. The hallway seemed longer than it should be, as if the hospital itself was playing with me. But then I saw the exit, the door I had entered through without stopping. I threw myself at it with all my might. This time the handle snapped. I fell to the other side, panting and shaking. When I looked back, the hallway was empty. The door to the old wing slowly closed with a creak, and suddenly all was quiet again. I stood there trying to catch my breath when my radio creaked again. "David, where are you?" It was the nurse's voice, now Clara and without interference. It took her several seconds to respond. When I told her that I was at the entrance of the old wing, it can't be her voice. It sounded restless. "We have been looking for you," she frowned. "I think it's only been a few minutes." "No, David, it's been 3 hours." My blood froze. I had no explanation. They took me to the room of rest, where I saw that I was not the only one affected. Several patients were in shock. Some were muttering about having seen figures in the dark. Others were talking about shadow beings who had touched them with icy hands. But what disturbed me the most was an old man in a wheelchair who looked me straight in the eye and said in a trembling voice, "The sick woman in room 403 was looking for my stomach." That room had been closed for more than 50 years. The official version was that there was a gas leak in the old wing which caused hallucinations in some patients and staff. But I know the truth. Since that night, the hospital never felt the same again, and although I resigned soon, there are still nights when I wake up Suddenly, with the feeling that something is watching me in the dark, I sometimes swear I still hear the whispers, and every time I walk past a hospital I feel a chill run down my spine, because now I know the truth. Not all patients leave when they die. Some are still there waiting for the ace of my flashlight. He blinked ominously as he told me. I slipped through narrow opening, the smell of damp earth and stale air filling my nostrils. Behind me I could hear Jake and Chris arguing quietly about which way to go. We were already lost. Although none of us wanted to admit it, when the reality of our situation became apparent, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold of the underground air. We were trapped in the depths of the caverns before, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. I'm Alex, a 23-year-old geology student with a passion for caving. When my friends suggested exploring the infamous Whispering Caverns as our last adventure before graduating, I accepted without hesitation. The cave system was known for its impressive formations and challenging passages, but it also had a certain reputation. Local legends spoke of strange noises, unexplained disappearances, and an otherworldly presence lurking in its deepest chambers. We laugh at those stories, attributing them to superstition and people's overflowing imaginations. Now, as we stood at a fork in the road of three identical tunnels, those legends didn't seem so funny anymore. I tell you, we came for that one, Jake insisted, pointing to the passage on the left. Chris shook his head. No way, man, we just passed through there. It has to be the one on the right. I remained silent, studying our surroundings. Something didn't feel right, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. The rock formations were familiar to me and at the same time subtly wrong, as if they were a painting in which the artist had deliberately altered small details. Guys, I said, my voice resonating strangely in the confined space, I think we should step back, try to find a point of reference that we both recognized. They turned to me, and I saw my own fear reflected in their eyes. We had been down here for hours, much longer than we had planned. Our water reserves were running low, and the batteries in our flashlights would not last forever. Just as we were about to retrace our steps, a sound echoed in the cavern. At first it was barely audible, about the dripping water and our own breathing, but soon it turned louder until they became what sounded like whispers. Listen. That's what Kais asked, his voice tense. We stood completely still, straining to hear. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere, a chaos of indistinct voices that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It's just the wind, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. We all knew there was no wind so deep underground, as if they were responding to his words. The whispers intensified now. I could almost make out words, although in a language I didn't know. The sound seemed to pull us into the center tunnel. We should take a look, I heard myself say, though every instinct was screaming at me to run in the opposite direction. Maybe it's other cavers or a rescue team. Jake and Chris nodded their pale faces to the dim light of our flashlights. We slowly drifted into the tunnel, whispers growing with each step. The passage opened into a great chamber, its ceiling lost in the darkness as our lights swept the room. Gasp! The walls were covered with strange symbols that glowed faintly with a phosphorescent light. It pulsed to the rhythm of the whispers that had reached a point of frenzy. What the hell is this place? Chris whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. Before anyone could answer, the floor under our feet, it started shaking. Small stones fell from the ceiling, and I heard Jake scream in alarm. We have to get out of here, I screamed, turning towards the entrance, but where the tunnel used to be, now there was only solid rock. Panic took hold of me. When I realized we were trapped, the vibrations increased and cracks began to form on the floor. From them I could see a strange pulsating light. It was then when I noticed that the symbols on the walls were moving, rearranging into new patterns. As I watched them, fascinated and horrified, began to form English words. The door opens. The sleeper wakes up. A deafening roar filled the chamber, drowning even the whispers. The ground fell beneath us, and we fell in a whirlwind of light and sound. I don't know how long we fell. It could have been seconds or centuries. When they recover, I found myself lying on a floor of cold stone in almost total darkness. My lantern had disappeared, but a faint pulsating glow allowed me to see enough. As my eyes adjusted, I realized to my horror that we were no longer anywhere in the caverns. Ainsu recognized the chamber we were in was coarse, walls made of a black, glassy substance that seemed to absorb the little light available near the eye. Could make out the silhouettes of Jake and Chris, both unconscious, but breathing. When I crawled towards them, a movement out of the corner of my eye made me freeze. Something emerged from the shadows. It was tall, at least twice the height of a man, with a body that seemed to flow and change like smoke. Where he should have had a face, There was only a group of luminous points that with a start I understood that they were eyes. A fear like I had never felt before paralyzed me when the creature approached, stopped a few meters from us, watching us with those alien eyes. Then to my amazement he spoke. "Welcome, children of the surface," he said, his voice echoing in my mind instead of my ears. "We have waited a long time for his arrival." I found my voice, although it came out barely like a whisper. "What are you? Where are we?" The form of the being vibrated as if it was fun. "We are the guardians of the deep, the guardians of the ancient paths, and you are in the heart of the world, where the barriers between realities weaken." As I spoke, more of your kind emerged from the shadows surrounding us. Jake and Chris began to move, moaning as they regained consciousness. "Why did they bring us here?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "They came of their own volition," replied the to-be, his curiosity, his desire to explore the unknown. "He called us. We just facilitated his journey." Jake was already wide awake, now his eyes wide open with terror at the sight of our surroundings. "Alex, what's going on? Where we are?" Before he could respond to Jake, the being spoke again. "They're at a crossroads. Children of the surface, the world above is changing, sickening from the poison of its people. We offer a choice." Their voice echoed in my mind like the echo of an unfathomable truth. "They can stay with us, learn the secrets of the deep, help keep the balance, or they can return to their world. But if they choose to return, they will be our emissaries. They will carry our message. They will share what they have seen." I looked at Jake and Kai's, seeing my own reflected in their faces. The offer was tempting. To learn the secrets of these beings, to discover truths that no human had imagined, but the thought of never seeing the light of the sun again, of leaving our families behind, our lives. I swallowed hard and spoke with a confidence that surprised me. "We need to go back. We can't abandon our lives." So the being was silent for a long moment, his eyes flickering with an inscrutable gleam. Finally he nodded. "So it will be, but remember this. Once you've seen beyond the veil, will never be able to fully return. Knowledge will always accompany them." Calling them back to the depths before we could answer, the camera began to swirl around us. I felt like we were moving at an impossible speed, as if we were traversing layers and layers of rock and earth in a matter of seconds, and then, suddenly, we were back in the familiar tunnels of whispering caverns, blinded by the glow of flashlights and human voices. Rescuers found us wandering disoriented, on the verge of collapse. They told us that we had been missing for over 24 hours. The official story was that we had missed out, that fear and dehydration had caused us to hallucinations. Our accounts of glowing symbols and smoke creatures were dismissed as delusions caused by extreme stress. But I know the truth. Sometimes in the middle of the night, when everything is in silence, I can still hear the whispers, and in my dreams I see those bright eyes calling me back to the heart of the world. We came out of the whispering caverns that day, but a part of me will always remain in those otherworldly depths, wondering what would have happened if we had chosen to stay. The first time I saw the child in the mirror, I thought he was losing his mind. I separated behind my reflection, pale and solemn with the pleading eyes for something I couldn't understand, blinked and disappeared. But that was just the beginning of a nightmare that would consume my life and challenge everything I thought I knew about reality. My name is Emily, and until 3 months ago I was just a 28-year-old woman with a completely normal life. I had a steady job as a graphic designer, a cozy apartment in the city, and a cat named Whiskers that I had more attitude than fur. Everything changed the day I bought that antique mirror at a flea market. It was a beautiful piece, an ornate gilded frame, worn by time, and a slightly cloudy but still functional glass. The old woman who sold it to me practically put it in my hands, her eyes clouded by age, shining with a strange intensity when she told me that it was destined for me. I should have known then that something was wrong, but I was too enchanted with the vintage air of the mirror as to listen to my instinct. The first week after hanging it in my room, everything was fine, normal, but then that night came when I saw the boy. I convinced myself that it was just a trick of the light, my imagination playing with me after staying up late working on a project, but deep down I knew it was more than that. It appeared again a few days later. This time for longer. I could make out more details. He seemed to be about 10 years old, with dark, disheveled hair and eyes that looked too old for his young face. He never spoke. He just watched me with that pleading look that broke my soul. I started to avoid the mirror by covering it with a sheet when I slept, but it didn't matter. I started to see him out of the corner of my mirrored eye in Windows, on my computer screen. always looking, always silently. My work began to suffer. I couldn't concentrate. I jumped at every shadow, every reflection. My friends noticed the change in me, the deep dark circles, the way I shuddered every time I saw my own reflection. They thought I was sick. They suggested I see a doctor. How could I explain to them that I was being stalked by a child in a mirror? Things came to a head a month after I bought it. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw him standing at the foot of my bed, not in a reflection, this time solid, real, or at least as real as a ghost can be. I leaned back, pressing myself against the headboard of the bed, my heart pounding so hard that I thought it would come out of my chest. "Who are you?" I managed to murmur. "What do you want?" The boy's lips moved, but no sound came out from them. He raised a trembling hand and pointed to the mirror, then pointed at me, his eyes widening in desperation. Somehow I mustered up the courage to get out of bed and approach the mirror. Standing in front of him with the child next to me, I noticed something strange. My reflection wasn't quite right. It was moving a split second after me. His eyes focused on something just behind my shoulder. "I don't understand," I whispered, looking at the child. "What am I supposed to do?" He pointed to the mirror again, and then made a gesture as if he was stepping forward. I looked again at my reflection that was now smiling in a way that I definitely didn't. A shiver ran down my spine when I understood the truth. That wasn't my reflection. Before I could react, hands came out of the mirror, grabbing my arms and pulling from me forward. I screamed, fighting against that impossible force, but it was too strong. I felt myself drawn into the mirror as the world around me shattered into fragments of light and shadow. When I regained consciousness, I was lying on a cold stone floor, in a room that looked like a twisted version of my bedroom. Everything was upside down, the colors were strange and dull, and there it stood above me with a triumphant smile. Was my reflection, or rather the thing that had been pretending to be my reflection, finally said his voice, a distorted echo of mine. "You have any idea how long I've been waiting for someone to fall into the trap? This realm has been so boring." I jumped to my feet backwards. "What are you? Where am I?" Laugh, a sound that made me shudder. "Oh, sweet human, this is the world behind the mirrors, where all forgotten reflections end and discarded dreams." My hands trembled. "And you are you," he whispered, "or rather the version of you that could have been if you had made different decisions." My mind was spinning, trying to process his words. But the child, who was he? The creature lost his smile for a moment, a hindrance, a remnant of the last soul trapped here. "He has been trying to warn the people for years, the little brat. But it doesn't matter anymore. It'll fade away now that I'm free." Horror came over me as I understood the magnitude of what had happened. I was trapped in some nightmarish realm. Esco, while that thing was free in my world. "You can't do this," I said, trying to keep calm. "I don't belong here." "Oh, but yes," I purr. "Everyone ends up here sooner or later. The Mirror Kingdom always claims that belongs to her." Looked at me with amusement and added, "Don't worry, you'll get used to it. Who knows, maybe in a few decades you'll be the one to trick some poor naive person into taking your place." With those words, she turned and walked through what seemed to be a glowing door, leaving me alone in that twisted mockery of my room. I don't know what happened there. Trying to understand my new reality, hours, maybe days, time seemed to move from differently in that place. I finally forced myself to explore my prison, the mirror realm, as I came to call it. It was a maze of distorted reflections from the real world. I could see glimpses of familiar places, my apartment, my office, the coffee shop where I used to, but everything was wrong. The colors were dull or too vibrant, the sounds repeated strangely, and the shadows moved when I wasn't looking, and I wasn't the only one there. As I wandered, I found other lost souls, people who, like me, had been deceived or accidentally stumbled upon this world. Some had been trapped so long that they no longer remembered their lives. Others were still desperately looking for a way out. The boy I knew later was called Tommy. He had been trapped in the 50s. Since then he had tried to warn others, but almost no one understood his signs, until it was too late. I was too trapped, but I refused to give up. I had to find a way back. I had to get my life back. The wind howled like a wounded animal as I gripped the steering wheel, squinting to try to see through the snow-covered windshield. That mountain pass was treacherous on the best days, but in the middle of the worst storm in decades, driving around was nothing short of suicide. My old Subaru skidded dangerously going around a hairpin bend and cursed my own stubbornness. I should have heeded the warnings and stayed in town. But now, with night falling and the storm getting worse, I knew I had to find shelter soon, or I would become another frozen corpse on the local news. "My name is Alex. I'm a freelance photographer and had come to the Rocky Mountains in search of the perfect shot of winter. I was always proud to drive extreme conditions of going where others didn't dare to capture stunning images. But as I felt my tires lose traction once again, I knew that maybe this time I had taken my luck too far. Just as I was considering stopping and waiting for the storm inside my car, a flash of light appeared in the distance, barely visible among the swirling snow. It seemed to come from a cabin. Hope ran through me as I steered the car towards the light, praying that it wasn't a hallucination caused by exhaustion. As I got closer, the silhouette of the building became clearer. It was larger than I had thought at first, more of a lodge than a simple cabin. But something about it made me uneasy. The architecture was strange, with angles that seemed to be slightly crooked, in a way that was difficult to describe. The windows were asymmetrical and elongated, and despite the light I had seen, there was no sign of cars outside or recent activity. Bears can't be choosers, I thought. I had no choice. The wind almost ripped my car door from my hands as I came out, the snow hitting my face with an intensity that made me gasp. I rushed to the lodge entrance, my backpack hitting my back with each step and hitting the heavy wooden door. There was no response. I tried the handle, and to my surprise it was open. "Hello," I knocked, stepping inside. "Someone here." The first thing I noticed was the silence despite the wind roaring outside. The moment I closed the door, the sound disappeared completely. Absolute silence. The lobby was immense, with vaulted ceilings that seemed to extend further than the exterior structure suggested. Antique furniture was scattered around the space in small islands of comfort. The walls were covered in strange paintings whose landscapes and figures seemed to move when I didn't look directly. Something was wrong. But the warmth of the lodge contrasted too much with the deadly cold outside. So I forced myself to ignore my discomfort. "Hello," I called again. A creak on the spiral staircase on the other side of the room spun me around in dry. A thin, hunched-over old man was slowly descending. His hair was snow-white, and his blue eyes pierced me with an intensity that gave me goosebumps. When he spoke, his voice was loud despite his fragile appearance. "Welcome, traveler," he said. "We've been waiting for you." A chill ran down my spine. "We've repeated to you." Looking around the empty lobby, the old man smiled, but the gesture didn't reach his eyes. "Oh yes, here at the Twilight Lodge we always have guests, only you can't see them yet." Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to turn around and run away. But outside a deadly storm was waiting for me, and here at least it was hot. I swallowed hard and forced a nervous smile. "I'm sorry for the intrusion," I said. "Alone, I need a place to stay until the storm passes. I can pay." The old man waved his hand. "Money is worthless here," he replied. "But we can make another kind of arrangement." "Tell me what you're looking for." The question puzzled me. "I'm a photographer," I replied. "I seek to capture the beauty of the mountains in winter." The old man tilted his head, his eyes shining with an emotion I couldn't identify. "Ah," an artist muttered. "Someone looking to capture the truth in an image. Yes, yes, I think he'll fit well here." Before he could ask what he meant by that, he turned and started to go upstairs. "Come on," he said without turning. "I'll show you your room." I hesitated just for a moment before following him as we went upstairs. The staircase felt longer than it should have been. It was much more LGA when we finally reached the corridor on the second floor. Something in my mind told me that this L could not have so many doors. Each one was different. Some were made of old wood, others of rusty metal. One seemed to be made of stone, another of glass that reflected indistinct shapes. The old man stopped in front of a deep blue door and he pushed it. "This will be your room during your stay," he announced. I stepped inside and gasped. The opposite wall was made entirely of glass, revealing a breathtaking landscape of moonlit snow-capped peaks. But that wasn't possible. The storm kept roaring outside, and the lodge wasn't high enough to have a view like that. My mind refused to accept what I saw. I whispered. The old man looked at me with that cryptic smile. "The Twilight Lodge exists in the spaces between realities," he said. "Here the world is flexible." My pulse quickened. "And the price? You said there was a price." Old man tilted his head. "The longer you stay, the more you'll pay," said that. He turned and closed the door behind him, leaving me alone. My first reaction was to try to open it again, but the door didn't move. I took a deep breath and I walked up to the window. The scenery was hypnotic. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures, logic-defying images, shape-shifting mountains when I wasn't looking at strange lights in the sky, and always at the edges of every photo, shadows that shouldn't be there. I don't know how much time I spent taking pictures, but when I finally put the camera down and looked in the bedroom mirror, my reflection was fading pale as if I was becoming part of the lodge. Panic overtook me. I grabbed my gear and ran to the door, but when I opened the hallway, it wasn't the same. The doors stretched out in all directions, endlessly. I ran. I heard a whisper following me. When I finally found the exit and threw myself into the cold of the mountain, woke up in my car on the side of the road. The storm had passed. I thought it had been a dream, until I checked my camera and saw the pictures. The Twilight Lodge was real, and I think it's still waiting for me. The light handle of my flashlight flashed ominously as I slipped through the narrow opening, the smell of damp earth and stale air filling my nostrils. Behind me I could hear Jake and Chris arguing in a whisper about which way to go. We were already lost, though none of us wanted to admit it as we went down. The reality of our situation was sinking into my mind. A shiver ran down my spine and had nothing to do with the cold air underground. We were trapped in the depths of the whispering caverns, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. I'm Alex, a 23-year-old geology student with a passion for caving. When my friend suggested exploring the infamous Whispering Caverns as our last adventure before the on-graduation, I accepted without hesitation. The cave system was known for its impressive formations and challenging passages, but it also had a dark reputation. Local legends spoke of strange noises, unexplained disappearances, and an otherworldly presence lurking in its deepest chambers. We laughed at the stories, attributing them to superstition and exaggerated imagination. Now standing at a fork in the fork of three identical tunnels, those legends didn't seem so much like it. Funny, I tell you we came from there, Jake insisted, pointing to the passage on the left. Chris shook his head. No way, man. We just passed by. It has to be the one on the right. I remained silent, studying our surroundings. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint that. The rock formations looked and at the same time subtly incorrect, like a painting in which the artist had altered small details on purpose. Guys, I said, my voice echoing strangely in the confined space, I think we should back off. Let's try to find a landmark that we both recognize. They turned to look at me, and I saw my own fear reflected in their eyes. We had been down there for hours, much longer than we had planned. Our water supply was running low, and the batteries in our flashlights wouldn't last forever, just as we were about to retrace our path. A reverberatory sound in the cavern at first was faint, barely audible over the dripping water and our breathing, but it grew into what sounded like whispers. Listen, it's asked, Kais, his voice tense. We stood motionless, straining to hear. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, a chaos of indistinct voices that made my skin crawl. It's just the wind, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. We all knew there was no wind deep in the cave. As if responding to his words, the whispers intensified. Now I could almost make out words, although in a language I didn't recognize. The sound seemed to draw us into the central tunnel. We should check it out, I heard myself say, though every instinct was screaming at me to run in the opposite direction. Maybe it's other cavers or a rescue team. Jake and Chris nodded, their faces pale in the dim light of our lanterns. We slowly made our way through the tunnel, whispers increasing with every step. The passage opened into a great chamber, its ceiling lost in the darkness above us. As we illuminated the room with our lights, I gasped. The walls were covered with strange symbols that glowed faintly, with a phosphorescent light pulsating to the rhythm of the whispers that had now reached a fever pitch. What hell is this place? Chris whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath our feet began to shake. Small stones fell from the ceiling, and I heard Jake scream in alarm. We have to get out of here, I screamed, turning it around. There was solid rock. Panic engulfed me as I realized we were trapped. The vibrations intensified, and cracks began to form in the ground. Through them I saw a strange pulsating light. Was then when I noticed that the symbols on the walls were moving, rearranging into new patterns. As I watched them hypnotized, they began to form English words. The door opens. The sleeper wakes up. A deafening roar filled the chamber, drowning out even the whispers. The ground collapsed beneath us, and we fell into a vortex of light and sound. I don't know how long we fell. It could have been a second or centuries ago. When they recovered, I lay on a cold stone floor, in almost total darkness. My lantern had disappeared, but a faint pulsating glow allowed me to see it enough. As my eyes adjusted, I realized in horror that we were no longer anywhere in the Whispering Caverns that I recognized. The chamber in which we stood was vast, its walls made of a black, glassy substance that seemed to absorb in the dim light present. I could make out Jake and Chris near me, both unconscious, but breathing as I crawled towards them. A movement out of the corner of my eye made me freeze. Something emerged from the shadows. It was tall, at least twice the height of a man, with a body that seemed to flow like smoke where his face should be. There was only a group of luminous dots that, with a shiver, I understood that they were eyes. Fear paralyzed me as the creature approached. It stopped a few meters away, watching us with its alien eyes. Then, to my amazement, it spoke. "Welcome, children of the surface," said its voice, echoing in my mind, instead of in my ears. "We have waited a long time for its arrival." I swallowed hard and somehow found my voice. "What are you? Where are we?" The shape of the creature seemed to ripple as if it was amused with my confusion. "We are the guardians of the deep, the custodians of the ancient ways, and you are in the heart of the world where the barriers between realities thin." As I spoke, more beings emerged from the shadows surrounding us. Jake and Chris began to move, moaning as we regained consciousness. "Why did you bring us here?" I asked, trying to hold back the tremor in my voice. "You came on your own," replied the creature, his curiosity, his desire to explore the unknown. "They called us. We just facilitated their journey." Jake was already wide awake, his eyes bulging with terror. "Alex, what's going on? Where are we?" Before he could answer, the being spoke again. "They're at a crossroads, children of the surface. They're at a crossroads, children of the surface. The world above is changing, sickening with the poison of their species. I offered them a choice." The creature did pause, your multiple eyes coming in with an emotion I couldn't decipher. "Stay with us, learn the secrets of the deep, help us keep our balance, or return to your world, but as our emissaries, spreading the truth about what lies beneath." I watched Jake and Chris, see my own conflict reflected in their faces. The offer was tempting, to learn the secrets of these entities, to see wonders that no human had ever witnessed, but the thought of never seeing the sun again, of abandoning our families and everything we knew, was unbearable. "We have to go back," I said firmly, surprised at the conviction in my voice. "Our families, our lives, we can't just abandon them." There was a long silence. The being watched us, his eyes shining with an indecipherable glow. Finally he nodded. "So it will be, but remember this. Once you've seen beyond the veil, never you will be able to fully return to your old lives. Knowledge will always be with you, calling you back to the depths." Before we could answer, the camera began to spin around us. I felt a vertigo, as if we were traversing layer after layer of rock and earth at an impossible speed. And suddenly we were back in the familiar passages of the Whispering Caverns, flickering in the glare of the rescuers' flashlights. The official story was that we had lost ourselves, that we suffered hallucinations due to lack of oxygen and dehydration. Our accounts of glowing symbols and beings made of shadows were dismissed as a shared illusion. But I know the truth. Sometimes in the stillness of the night I still hear the whispers, and in my dreams I see those eyes glowing in the darkness, calling me back to the heart of the world. We came out of the Whispering Caverns that day, but a part of me will always remain in those depths, wondering about the choice we made and the secrets we left behind. The moment I heard the first scream, I knew that this wasn't going to be a normal shift night. Working as a night guard at Oakwood Hospital used to be quiet, but that night the air was charged with a strange energy, a sensation that made my skin tingle. I had no idea I was about to face a horror that would haunt me for the rest of my life. My name is David, and I've worked in security at Hogwood for a long time. The last 5 years. It's an old building with a history dating back to the 1920s. Like most hospitals with so many years, it had its share of ghost stories and urban legends. I never gave them too much importance, preferring to focus on tangible threats, troublesome visitors, disoriented patients trying to escape, that kind of thing. That night's shift started like any other. I made my rounds. I talked to the nurses. It was about 2 a.m. when everything changed. A scream went through the empty corridors, bouncing off the walls in a way that made it impossible to determine its origin. I jumped to my feet with the adrenaline pumping. It was not the kind of scream that was sometimes heard in a hospital of pain or anguish. It was an absolute pure scream out of terror. I picked up the radio as I walked down the hallway. Someone else heard that. Where it came from, there was a moment of static, then a confused response. "To hear that everything here is calm." I frowned and slowed down. I had imagined it, but then I heard it again, weaker this time, but unmistakable. It seemed to come from the old wing, a section of the hospital that had been closed for months for renovations. Against me better judgment, I decided to investigate. The old wing was a maze of dimly lit hallways and empty rooms. The air permeated with the smell of dust and disinfectant. As the temperature progressed it seemed to drop. My breath turned into little clouds in front of me. Then I saw her, a young woman in a threadbare hospital gown, standing at the end of the hallway, her back to me, her long dark hair falling in tangled strands. "Over her shoulders, miss," I called, my voice echoing in the empty hallway. "She shouldn't be here. This area is slowly closed with almost excruciating slowness." She turned to look at me. The cold in the air seemed to intensify. My blood froze at the first glance at her well. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with dark veins visible beneath the surface, but what terrified me the most were her totally black eyes. Two dark voids staring at me as if they were bottomless pits. I took a step back. My training forgotten, in the face of the impossible, the woman advanced towards me with jerky movements, as if each step was an unnatural effort. "Help me," her voice whispered, seeming to come from everywhere and from none at the same time. "They are always coming. They always come." Before I could answer, she disappeared. She did not run. She did not hide in a room. She simply vanished. I was pinned to the floor, the heart hammered in my chest. My rational mind tried to find a logical explanation. A patient with a rare disease, perhaps, that had wandered to the old wing. But deep down I knew the truth. I had seen something that shouldn't exist. I don't know how long I was there, paralyzed by fear. It was the crackle of my radio that finally got me out of the trance. David answers. "Where are you?" I picked up the radio with a trembling hand. "I'm in the old wing. I thought I heard something. Get out of there." Now he ordered the voice to the other end with an urgent tone. "We have a problem. Up here, multiple patients report seeing things, shadows moving on their own, voices in empty rooms. We need all the available staff." As if my radio had activated something. The lights in the hallway began to flicker in the momentary darkness. I saw shapes move in the edges of my vision, distorted figures, inhuman. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life, without stopping, until I left the old wing and returned to the main area of the hospital. But even then I knew something was wrong. The air was heavy with indescribable tension. The hallways were filled with murmurs of patients and staff. Chaos took over the hospital. Patients were hysterical, describing terrifying visions. Some said icy hands had touched them. Others claimed to have seen loved ones who had been dead for years. Staff were trying to contain the situation. But they, too, had seen things. When dawn began to dawn, things finally calmed down. The visions faded away. The hospital was left in a state of collective shock. The official explanation was a case of mass hysteria triggered by an alleged gas leak that would have been caused hallucinations. It was a convenient, logical story, but I knew the truth. What I had seen in that hallway was not a hallucination. In the weeks that followed, I tried to investigate the hospital's past, looking for any clues that would explain what had happened. I discovered old articles about a fire in the 1940s that killed several patients. I also found rumors about unethical medical experiments in basements during World War II, but nothing concrete, nothing that fully explained what we had experienced that night. I quit soon after. I couldn't keep walking those halls wondering what else might be lurking in the shadows, yet the experience never left me. Even now, years later, I avoid hospitals as much as I can, and some nights I wake up to the echo of a whisper in my ear. They're coming. They always come. I try it was all a dream, that it was my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down I know the truth. For one night the veil between our world and something else weakened, and what crossed was scarier than I could have ever imagined. I had never told this story. Who would believe me? But I feel the need to write it now. Maybe as a warning, because I know that somewhere in the corridors of an old hospital something. Keep waiting, watching, and sooner or later it will manifest again. The wind howled like a wounded animal as I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to see through the snow-covered windshield. This mountain pass was dangerous on the best days, but in the middle of the worst snowstorm driving around here it was suicide. I knew I had to find shelter before night fell. That's when I saw it, a cabin barely visible between the curtain of snow with a flickering light inside, and although something in my instinct told me to go on, I turned the steering wheel and headed towards it. The cabin seemed to materialize in the snow with a flickering light on one of its old Subaru trembled with each gust of wind, and I knew I couldn't keep driving, or I stopped here, or I risked freezing in the mountain. Grabbed my bag, wrapped myself better in my jacket, and got out of the car, shrinking. Maybe it was the way the light flickered, as if flickering at a strange frequency. Maybe it was the fact that there were no footprints in the snow, not a single sign that anyone had recently entered or left. But I had no choice. I climbed the porch steps and banged on the door with the knuckles. Hello, the wind yulel behind me. There was no response. I tried the handle, and surprisingly, it hit easily. The door opened with a creak. Excuse me, my car was trapped in the snow alone. I need to take shelter for a while. I took a step inside. The air inside was strangely warm, although I didn't see any fireplace lit or signs of heating. The cabin was bigger than it looked from outside. Furniture, old walls, covered with pictures and framed photographs. Everything seemed normal except for one thing. There was no sound. The wind roaring with fury outside was not heard at all in here, not even my breathing, or the sound of my boots on the wooden floor. It was as if the cabin absorbed the noise. A shiver ran down my spine. Something was wrong, very wrong. I turned to get out, but the door no longer. There was no entrance, just a solid wooden wall. My pulse shot up. This wasn't possible. I turned on my heels, trying to control the rising tide of panic. I had to find another way out. I went into the cabin. Each room was stranger than the last. The pictures on the walls were of people with blurred faces. The clocks had no hands, and they blinked them with an irregular rhythm, as if they were breathing. Then I saw the door at the end of the corridor. It was different from the others, black, worn wood, and the worst thing was ajar. Something inside me screamed not to open it, not to look, but it was too late because the door opened by itself. The door opened slowly, revealing a darkness that seemed denser than the shadow itself. Was an absolute emptiness, as if beyond that threshold there was nothing. My whole body shuddered with a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Something was waiting for me inside. I couldn't see it, but I felt it, an ancient presence, patient, who had been there since long before I arrived. I took a step back, my heart beating frantically, and then something inside the room breathed in a low, guttural sound, deep, as if the very air of the room was alive. My first instinct was to run, but where the door I had entered had disappeared, there was no escape. The only way out seemed to be forward, into the darkness. Then the lights in the cabin began to flicker frantically. The shadows on the walls stretched, and I heard it, a hypnotic sweet voice. They see an icy shiver. It ran down my spine. It was a voice. My mother was familiar, but my mother had died 5 years ago. My legs were shaking. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real, and yet there it was. Come, Alex. My mother's voice was calling me from the darkness. Don't be afraid. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because curiosity is stronger than fear. Maybe because deep down a part of me wanted to believe it was her. I took a step towards the black door, then another. I could feel the air inside, denser, as if I were entering the eye of a storm. I reached out, and then an invisible force tore me inward. I fell. Not on the floor, not in a room. I fell into nothingness. The absolute emptiness surrounded me. My mother's voice distorted, transforming into something inhuman, a guttural and rumbling growl that vibrated inside my skull. And then I saw it, something enormously vast, larger than any creature I could imagine. It had no fixed form. It moved, it twisted, it changed. It had eyes, dozens, maybe hundreds, opening and closing in the darkness, and mouths, so many mouths, some whispering, others laughing, and some screaming. The terror paralyzed me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was trapped, consumed, and then, with impossible force, I was thrown back to the cabin. I hit the ground with a roar, and Jade trying to catch my breath. I looked around frantically. The black door was still there, but now it was closed, and on its surface there was something that wasn't there before. A large footprint, deformed as if something on the other side had tried to come out. A shaky bland escaped my lips. I stood up with difficulty and ran desperately, looking for a way out, and then, as if the cabin would have changed my mind, the front door reappeared without a second thought. I slammed it open and staggered out. There were no footprints. There was no sign that I had ever been there. I got into my car with trembling hands and drove without looking back. I never talked about what happened that night, but sometimes when I see a storm forming in the distance, I feel a chill run through me, because I know it's still going there, somewhere, waiting for another traveler, waiting for someone desperate enough to get in, and worst of all, I know that if I had taken one more step I wouldn't have gotten out.